From Havana to Caracas to Tehran, the map obviously looks scattered, but the pattern on Washington's radar is brutally simple. Three sanctioned, defiant regimes, three very different crises, but in each case, there is one common thread. Oil and goods moving, but not with or from United States. Money moving back, but not in the US dollar. And every time this pattern emerges, the United States response sharpens, from regime change playbook in Venezuela to a peaceful takeover script for Cuba and to a full-fledged war on Iran. Well, it won't be wrong to say that if we follow the similar trail, we might figure out Trump's next target. But let's leave it for some other day. And today, let's break down for you what's that one common thread between Iran, Venezuela and Cuba that makes Trump go out on different military campaigns. Well, starting with the current Iran war, which is the most explosive expression of this very pattern. As US and Israeli strike hits Tehran and beyond, officials in Washington offered a rotating list of justification for their action. For example, stopping a supposedly imminent threat, halting a near weapons-grade nuclear program, and degrading missile that threatens American homeland as per Trump. But remember, Omani mediators indicated shortly just before US launched Operation Epic Fury that Iran had just signaled zero accumulation, zero stockpiling, and full verification of uranium to the IAEA. And if it's true, then why didn't Trump perhaps stopped or delayed the strikes on Iran? It's because it's not just about the imminent threat. Let's take more examples to make you understand the real issue. Let's talk about LATAM. Remember, in Latin America, Washington has backed regime change in Venezuela and is now talking about a peaceful takeover in Cuba. And once again, all of this in the pretext of democracy, corruption, and human rights. Well, on the paper for United States, these are three separate theaters with distinct histories. But in reality, all three share one strategic move that rattles the foundation of US financial power. In each case, oil or the promise of it has been tied to a Chinese-financed ecosystem, traded and settled not in dollar but in yuan. And in reality, owing to this for Washington, this is not just about imminent threat. It's about the architecture that has kept the dollar at the center of global energy and by extension, global power since the 1970s. Well, Venezuela was the early warning. As US sanctions tightened, President Nicolas Maduro opened vow to free Caracas from the dollar by invoicing oil to China in yuan. To keep cash flowing under sanctions, Venezuela state firms sold crude to Chinese buyers at steep discount of roughly $13 to $15 below Brent in many cases, with much of the transaction routed through opaque semi-official channels that by some estimates covered 80% of the entire shipments. Now remember, as per reports, Chinese firm logged in reserves in Venezuelan fields holding around 440 billion barrels on paper, while paying in yuan and tying the entire value chain including refineries, infrastructure, logistics to Chinese finance. Now Iran went further and made the loop more sophisticated. Now as early as 2012, Tehran arranged yuan-based trade via Russian banks, importing cheap Chinese goods and bartering them against oil that was already discounted by $8 to $10 per barrel. Over time, much of their trade shifted into a shadow system centered on Bank of Kunlun, a small Chinese lender already cut off from much of the Western finance and therefore perfectly placed to handle sanctioned deals. Iranian oil quietly reached China after being relabeled through intermediaries like Malaysia, while payment landed in yuan accounts in Kunlun that could be spent only on Chinese goods and projects, effectively turning oil into stored credit inside China's economy. Now by 2025, China was buying more than 80% of Iran's seaborne oil exports, much of it at a discount and largely outside the dollar system. In fact, that channel was logged in by a 25-year China-Iran agreement signed in 2021, covering energy, infrastructure, security, and backed by Beijing's push to bring Iran into BRICS Plus as part of a broader de-dollarization trading bloc. Cuba's story is smaller in volume but very similar. China's Exim Bank poured funding into refurbishing Cuba's aging oil infrastructure, culminating in a $6 billion deal to massively expand a refinery and add an LNG terminal. all financed by Chinese credit with Venezuelan oil as collateral. Trade with Beijing increasingly used yuan, knitting Havana into Chinese payment system and positioning the island as a potential transshipment hub for Gulf of Mexico crude into a Chinese-centric energy network. Remember, that's why I said in the beginning, 3 countries, 3 different geographies, but one financial reality. Oil and infrastructure anchored to Beijing and settlements drifting steadily from dollars to the Chinese yuan. For decades, Washington's dominance rested not just on military reach, but on something far more invisible, the petrodollar system. After the oil shocks of the early 1970s, the US struck a quiet bargain with Saudi Arabia and then the wider Gulf. And the bargain was, oil would be priced in dollars and surplus petrodollars would be reinvested into US treasuries in exchange for security guarantees and arms. Well, this deal effectively underwrote the dollar's role as world's reserve currency. But now the world is fraying, and especially the Chinese. Now the US shale revolution has turned America into world's largest oil producer and a net exporter since 2021, reducing its direct dependency on imported crude. And at the same time, China is steadily expanding yuan-based trade finance, briefly overtaking the euro in 2024 as the second most used currency in global trade payments. Still small at around 5.8%, but rising against a dominant dollar at roughly 82%. Now, seen through that lens, the sharpness of US response to Iran, Venezuela and Cuba looks less random and more calculated. Caracas was not only punished for authoritarianism, but for shipping heavily discounted barrels east under a yuan umbrella. Now, Havana is under pressure just as it deepens resilience on Chinese capital and currency for its energy lifeline. And Tehran, after building perhaps the most advanced dollar-free oil channel to China, is now facing a war that, among other things, threatens to choke off what flows and sends a warning shot to any other producer tempted by similar deal. And that is why the most telling commonality between Iran, Venezuela and Cuba is not their ideology, geography or rhetoric, but the color of the currency settling their oil. And that's why we say, to guess where Washington's gaze turn next, follow the pipeline of yuan.
از این اون ته همت این منم تا این بالا همینجوری